Hello, welcome one and all to another book to game comparison video for the Nancy Drew series. Today I am going to be talking about Tomb of the Lost Queen. So the first thing we're going to look at is the novel. This is Secrets of the Nile and is from the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys Super Mystery series. It was published in 1995 and is only the third instance in which a super mystery is involved in the Nancy Drew games, which is kind of exciting. And then the game that this book inspired is Tomb of the Lost Queen and was released in 2012. For those of you who have never watched or listened to one of my comparison videos, I'm just going to give you a quick explanation about what this is. So the first thing I do is I look at the source material for one of the Nancy Drew games. In this case, it is the novel Secrets of the Nile, and I break it down. So I talk about what the storyline is, events that may occur, who the characters are, and so forth. After that, I then look at the game, which again in this case is Tomb of the Lost Queen, and I do the same thing. So look at who the characters are, what happens, who the culprits are, etc. And after that, I then do the actual comparison. So I'll take an element from both the book and the game and look at how it's different or the same between the two mediums. And examples that I might look at include the location, the title, the storyline, characters, events. And because I'm doing this breakdown, a spoiler alert is in effect because I will spoil everything. So with that, let's get started. So we are looking at book number 25 of the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys Super Mystery series, Secrets of the Nile. So Frank and Joe Hardy are tasked by a man named Jonathan Kimball to impersonate these boys named Cole and Cooper Addison. They are brothers who are apparently going to be kidnapped in Cairo. And Jonathan wants these two Hardy boys to take their place. This is to keep the Addisons safe. He also asks them if they can get some female friends to help them because they need wives because the Addison brothers are apparently married. So Frank and Joe ask Nancy and Bess to play the role of their partners. And so everything is set up for them. Kimball provides them with luggage and clothing to make sure that they look the part of the Addisons. And then the foursome arrive in Egypt, and they're all preparing for kidnapping. That doesn't happen. Instead, someone breaks into their hotel room. And the sleuths are trying to figure out why this happened rather than them being kidnapped. And then they find a little piece of material that they realize is used in bombs. And they deduce that they've been set up. They contact the Addisons and discover that the whole backstory they were given was false. They don't even have wives. And what has actually happened is that they were brought to Egypt not to take on the role of the Addisons, but for the sheer purpose of smuggling bomb components into the country. So now the young sleuths have to figure out who's the target of this bomb. Why is there now this threat, very different from the one they were originally told about? So they suddenly have a much more intense case to investigate. Now, along with this, Nancy and Bess run into a woman who is very upset and who confides in them that her ex-husband has kidnapped their young daughter, Layla, and brought her from the United States over to Egypt. And she doesn't know why this has happened, and she's fretful, very worried, and the girls decide they're going to help out this woman. So we wind up having two cases that the group are delving into, but there's a lot of overlap. But before we discuss the overlap, let's look at the characters. And there are quite a few. And what we learn is that there are people who claim to be one person, but are really someone else entirely. So first we have Jonathan Kimball. So again, this is the gentleman who asked the Hardys to help him with the case, but his real name is John Krieger. He does not work for the State Department, but rather for the Aquarius Group, which is an engineering firm in the United States. Then we have Bez Mahfouz, who is basically his sidekick, and he has a few run-ins with the sleuths. He's not very friendly. Next is Susanna Porter Rashad. This is the woman who Nancy and Bess encounter, and they help her with tracking down her ex-husband and their daughter. And speaking of the ex-husband, that's Darius Rashad, and he is taking their daughter not really for kidnapping purposes, but actually to keep her safe. And I'll explain more of that shortly. There is Bishar Yassin, who we encounter only a few times. She is an ex-girlfriend of Darius. And then we have Dominique Moreau and Isabelle Moreau, or so they claim. Their real names are Cindy Cahill and Liz Henderson. They, as we can see, have other identities, and I'll explain that when I break down characters. And then there's Senator Michael Nasser, who was involved in the Aquarius group and winds up being the assassination target. So as this story is unfolding, as we're investigating what's going on with this bomb, as well as Susanna's husband, the boys and girls mysteries keep leading to the same people and communities. They start off in Cairo, and then they both have to go to Aswan, and then both cases lead to Luxor. And they realize this can't just be a coincidence. There's something else going on. There's clear overlap. And essentially what's happened is that Krieger, who works for Aquarius Group, had this plan of hopefully getting this engineering contract in Egypt. And this was to search for other sources of water. And if they were found, and this is other sources aside from the Nile, if they were found, he was going to lie about those results. If more bodies of water were found, then the value of property along the Nile would go down, which he and this group of people don't want. If that value can stay high, they can get a kickback. So this is Krieger's plan. And Senator Nasser was involved with this, but then he backs out, and he's going to do whatever he can to prevent the Aquarius group from getting this contract. And that is why he is the target of assassination by Krieger and Mahfouz. In addition to this, Darius Rashad also works for the Aquarius group, and he found out about this plot. And he's taken his daughter Layla to his home country to keep her safe, because he's worried that she will be used against him. He doesn't tell his wife this plot because he doesn't want to put her in any danger. So it's really quite complex, but all the stories lead up to the same thing, that there's an assassination plot having to do with this engineering scheme. And it all gets sorted out. The baddies are found, the bomb is found and disabled, and a family is reunited, but it is quite an intense story. So now let's look at the game. So this is game number 26, Tomb of the Lost Queen of the Nancy Drew Adventure Series. So Nancy is helping a team of archaeologists and Egyptologists at a dig site about 100 clicks outside of Cairo. And she has a mentor named John who has invited her to the dig, and he winds up injured in a sandstorm. But what they learn when John goes to hospital is that it wasn't an accident. He was actually attacked, presumably by one of the team members. So Nancy now needs to figure out who attacked John and why, while also following these ancient clues to help find the tomb of Nefertari, who's been dubbed the Lost Queen. And along the way, she gets some assistance from an old acquaintance, Professor Hotchkiss. And there are so many things going on. There are cave-ins, sabotage, and there are thefts. And all of these events are blamed on a curse. And Nancy has to figure out, of course, is this curse real? Or are these actual accidents? Or is someone behind all this? Again, what's really going on? So the characters in the game include John Boyle. So he is a professor at Kingston University and invited Nancy to the dig. Then we have Abdullah Bakhoum, who is another Egyptologist. He's very well known and he's quite pompous. Then there is Lily Crew, who is a student, and she has a bit of a sketchy history, if you want to put it that way, and is desperate to stay on this dig team. Next is Dylan Carter, who is a tour guide who appears sort of out of the blue at this site that people shouldn't know about. So how did he get there? Then there's Jamila Eldine, who is sort of a unique character. She claims to believe in aliens and believes that they are the reason that temples and tombs all exist. And then we have our one phone contact, who is Professor Hotchkiss, who again provides Nancy with some assistance. So as we continue playing through the game, we learn that in some ways there are multiple perpetrators. Lily has done these very dangerous things on Abdullah's orders. And this is because she, again, really desperately wants to stay on this dig team and is willing to do anything to be present. So Abdullah gives her her tasks and she follows through, but she does feel very guilty about it. Abdullah, on the other hand, is really boastful and doesn't really worry about the consequences. But of course, in the end, he gets caught. So there is our game, and now we can do the actual comparison. So I'll start by looking at the titles. And these, as we can see, are very different. We have Secrets of the Nile, which is appropriate for the book, and Tomb of the Lost Queen, which is appropriate for the game. And because the stories focus on very different things, it makes sense that the game does not share the title of the book. So, for instance, Secrets of the Nile, the book, really does have this sort of undercurrent relating to the Nile. The game has nothing to do with that. The game focuses on trying to find the tomb of the lost queen, Nefertari, so naturally that's going to be its title. So there's not too much to say about the titles beyond that they are fitting for each of their stories, but sharing titles would not have made sense. Now, if we look at storylines, we're also going to see some big differences here. So the setup for the book is that the Hardys and their friends Nancy and Bess have been set up to smuggle bomb components, which is meant to lead to an assassination. And along with this, there's also the kidnapping of a child. So intense storyline. Whereas for the game, Nancy is helping a team of Egyptologists unearth a tomb while she's simultaneously investigating this attack on John and these other occurrences that are being blamed on a curse. So right off the bat here, we do see that these stories are very different. We do have some similarity as far as location goes. The book takes place in 3 areas, but it's all within Egypt. So we start off in Cairo, then we go to Aswan, and then Luxor. So all in Egypt. The game takes place at the dig site KU-67, which is, again, just about an hour, well, I shouldn't say an hour's drive, 100 kilometers outside of Cairo. It's probably longer than an hour's drive if you're driving on sand. So locations are essentially the same. Both games take place in Egypt. So with that, let's look at the characters. And I've said this in other videos, these comparisons get more and more difficult the further into the series we go because they tend to be very different stories, book to game, which makes doing a comparison almost impossible. This is no exception. This book and game, I've really struggled to put this together. We do have 2 instances where there are some character overlap, one of which barely counts. But I'll show you. Let's get into this. So we'll start with Jonathan or John and John. So this is the person who basically invites our detectives or single detective in the case of Tomb of the Lost Queen to our story. And so in the book, we have John Krieger, who pretends his name is Jonathan Kimball and says that he works for the State Department. And this is to trick the Hardys and their friends into bringing bomb components over to Egypt. John Krieger is the head of the Aquarius group, and he plots to assassinate Senator Nasser, who has backed out of this scheme about the line about other bodies of water in Egypt. This is to indicate that the Nile is the only source of water in the area. So really quite a nefarious person. In the game, it's a bit of a different story. He's still the one who's invited Nancy to the case, but he's a professor at Kingston University. He's not lying about his identity. And he asks Nancy initially to join the dig team, but then to investigate his accident, or so-called accident. He wants to find out who attacked him and to keep looking for Nefertari's tomb. So we do have a couple Johns, not just males, but their name is John in both the book and game. But one is a culprit, one is quite the opposite. So now we're going to look at just the book characters, and then we'll go into game characters. So next we have Bess, who is, again, only in the book. He is often referred to as Mahfouz, his last name. They don't learn his first name until the end of the story, and Bess Marvin is really upset that she shares her name with this creep. He is a henchman for John Krieger, and he threatens the sleuths on multiple occasions. They have a couple of run-ins with him. Then we have Darius and Susanna. So as already noted, Darius works for the Aquarius group, and he learned about Krieger's plot. And he worries that Krieger's going to go after his daughter, so he kidnaps her, and they go back to Egypt, where he thinks he's going to be safe. He doesn't tell his ex-wife Susanna about this plan because he's worried that if she knows the Aquarius group's plot, that's going to put her in danger. But this leaves her confused and upset and worried about her daughter. She doesn't know why she's been kidnapped, so she travels to Egypt to try to locate the two of them and then to bring Layla, that's their daughter, back home. Then we have Bishara. She is an ex-girlfriend of Darius. She works at a television studio. We don't see a whole lot of her, but Susanna does go to her to help, to hopefully help find Darius. And Bishara, lies about having seen Darius. She initially says, I haven't seen him. Susanna, Bess, and Nancy return on another occasion and actually hear Darius and Layla with Bishara. And there's a bit of a confrontation, but Darius and Layla run away. So Bishara was trying to help Darius. It wasn't meant to be anything nefarious against Susanna, but she's trying to help an old friend. Then we have Dominique and Isabel, or Cindy and Liz. They are two CIA operatives who are tasked with following Krieger. So they don't actually play that big of a role in the novel. We see Dominique and Isabel, who claim to be aunt and niece, and they're just on holiday. But they do pop up everywhere that the Hardys, Nancy, and Bess do. Cairo, Aswan, Luxor, what's going on? They kind of have to wonder, is there more to these two? Are they really on holiday? And no, it turns out that as their names, real names are Cindy and Liz, that they are spies, trying to figure out what's going on with Krieger. And they knew some of what was going on, but not all of it. But yeah, their roles are actually kind of minimal. And then finally, we have Michael, who is a U.S. senator who is initially involved with Krieger's scheme to falsify any exploration findings of bodies of water in Egypt. But then he backed out of the plan, and he wants to stop the Aquarius group from gaining the engineering contract in Egypt. And this is what makes him the target of assassination by Krieger and Mahfouz. So those are sort of the main characters from the book, and now we can look at the game characters. We've already talked about John, but now we can look at Abdullah. So he's a famous, pompous Egyptologist. He thinks he is the greatest person ever. He's very keen for the glory of finding Nefertari's tomb. And he's also responsible for the supposed curse, and not just crimes at this dig site, but at other ones as well. So he actually has been a criminal long before this dig. And he enlists Lily to help him. And Lily is a student with, as I said before, a bit of a sketchy record, and she helps Abdullah with his scheme in order to remain on the dig team. Then we just have a few more characters. We've got Dylan, who is a tour guide, who, again, as already said, just sort of pops up at the dig site. We don't know how he found out about it, how he even got there. That's very suspicious in and of itself. And then he winds up becoming injured because of Lily. She didn't mean to hurt him. She meant to scare him away. And, well, he certainly did go away, but he went away to hospital because he got hurt so badly. And then finally we have Jamila. And she is the other character who we kind of see in the book. But it hardly counts because she is the assistant to Bishara, and that's about it. We just kind of see her when Nancy, Bess, and Susanna go to talk to Darius's ex-girlfriend, but she doesn't really play much of a role beyond that. So barely counts. Whereas in the game, she has a bit of a bigger role. She feigns a belief in aliens, and this is so that she can secretly investigate Abdullah, as well as looking for Nefertari's tomb. And she thinks people are not going to be suspicious of her if they can't take her seriously. And that's really it for characters. And then there are just two other things that I want to bring up, and this is because I'm trying desperately to find things to compare between the two stories. It is very difficult. So the first thing is the aspect of a tomb. So in the book, at one point, Nancy and Frank are looking for Darius and Layla, and it takes them to the Valley of the Kings. And they follow the father and daughter into this sealed off or closed off tomb. They have a bit of a confrontation there. And then Krieger and Mahfouz find them. And the two baddies place the four into coffins. So very intense, pretty serious things in a tomb. In the game, it's a little different. The whole story is set around a tomb, trying to locate the tomb of the lost queen that they have slowly been unearthing. And then there are some cave-ins, some bad stuff happens, and there's more than one coffin found. So a little bit of overlap. Again, I'm really trying to find things to actually compare between the two stories. And then finally, just sort of the educational components to the two. The book focuses on the Nile. That's really the big cultural and historical reference that the book contains. The game doesn't talk about the Nile. Instead, its focus is on pharaohs, and more specifically Nefertari and Ramses II. And there's a book as well of other rulers in Egypt. So both stories contain some facts about Egypt, but the type of facts and the focus varies quite a bit. So now to conclude, Her Interactive's 2012 game, Tomb of the Lost Queen, is based very loosely off of the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys super mystery, Secrets of the Nile, that was published in 1995. There are two things that they share in common. That is the location and two character names, one of which hardly counts. So John, his role is a little bit more similar in that he's what brings the detectives, but that's it. They're two different characters otherwise. And then Jamila, just from the game, sharing the name of a character from the book who doesn't really have a role. So really beyond that, these two stories are completely dissimilar. They're nothing alike. The book really focuses on heavy-duty assassination attempts. There's a bomb, and then kidnapping, and again, this tie to the Nile. And the game takes a very different direction with its story. It focuses on Egyptology and unearthing the lost queen Nefertari's tomb. So very different directions, even though both do focus a fair bit on Egypt and its history and culture. And an observation I made to myself was that I typically, and I've said this in my other videos, I typically enjoy the books more than Her Interactive's adaptations. This is one of the rare instances where Her Interactive's creativity was to their benefit and surpassed the story of the book, in my opinion. I think that they made for a very engaging storyline by basing their story on Egyptology rather than a story about water, aquifers and things like that, because you can tell that story somewhere else. I think this was a nicer tie to Egypt, and talking about pharaohs as well, really brought the location of Egypt to life. So I think that was a very smart move on Her Interactive's part. And that is my comparison. So two very different stories. Secrets of the Nile, we've got, again, assassinations and kidnapping, things we don't see in Tomb of the Lost Queen, which is focused on unearthing a tomb and blaming things on a curse, and we don't see any of that in the book. Very, very different stories, and again, this makes for comparing quite difficult and rather tedious for me. I don't enjoy trying to put these together when I can't find overlap. And I wonder why Her Interactive sometimes makes these choices, why they say their game is based off of a book when it isn't really. In this case, it's basically just the location. Could Her Interactive have found another book that involves a dig of some sort? It doesn't necessarily have to be unearthing a tomb, but some other excavation or search. Could they have used that as inspiration for Tomb of the Lost Queen? Maybe employed some elements of that other story into the game. And another query I have, and it's something I've brought up before, I don't remember how recently I did, but I wonder why they don't take more of the names from the characters of the book. Is it because they're not really looking at the book? Are they just finding out, okay, this is a story that takes place in Egypt, score, we're going to say that's what this game is based off of, but we're not really looking at the book. We're just writing our whole own story. Because they could take names. For instance, we have Abdullah from the game. Where did they get the name Abdullah? They could have used Bes Mahfouz or Darius Rashad. They had these names from the book that they could have used, but they didn't. The same for Dylan Carter. Granted, I think they chose his last name to pay homage to that Carter expedition, but they could have given him another name like Cole or Cooper Addison, or, Jonathan Kimball. May not sound super British, but, they could have taken more elements from the book, even if they are small ones, and incorporated them into the game. But they didn't. And again, why is that? Is it because they didn't actually look at the book, or did they? I don't know. They did take the name Jamila from like a tertiary character. Why did that name get chosen? Big question I have. But yeah, so that's essentially my comparison. And I do want to reiterate that this is actually not a bad game. I mean, it's nothing like the book. And it's difficult for me to say that Her Interactive made a better game than a book. It does happen occasionally. But because these two stories are so different, it's harder to believe that they were able to create something so much better than the book. They really did manage to bring the location alive. I think had they followed the storyline of Secrets of the Nile, it just wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have felt like a story that had to take place in Egypt. Whereas focusing on Nefertari, you truly feel like you are in Egypt. So again, this was a very smart decision of Her Interactive's, in my opinion, that is. So yes, let's leave it there. That's my comparison for Secrets of the Nile and Tomb of the Lost Queen. Again, a very difficult comparison to do when you've got two stories that are not the same. But I hope that it was entertaining for you and that you were able to pick up a copy of this book and read it and compare it to the game, or to do that with any of the other books and games. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.